I've got my book in my hand, and I'm going to just read Out the Darkness, my story in football from top to rock bottom. Some of you may have read my book, some of you may have not. I've been backwards and forwards for 1.5 years, 2 years, trying to think of the best way to do a podcast. I've always wanted to do a podcast. And what is the best way to set that podcast up that hopefully is going to, the people that listen to it is going to help them if they're in a bit of a struggle, they're struggling mentally in some way. But I didn't want it to be, hello and welcome to Out the Darkness with me, Matt Piper. I've been going backwards and forwards for way over 1 year now. How to set the podcast up, what kind of structure should it have, what kind of guests should you have on. And then I had this idea of, because a lot of people have asked me, is the book available in audio? And it's not. So I thought, let me just read the book. But I'm not the best reader at the best of times. And that could get a little tedious and a little boring, dare I say. So the plan that we've come up with is to read excerpts from the book for certain episodes, well, for every episode actually, that kick starts that episode off, and then that is a focus. That excerpt will be a focus of discussion for that particular podcast. Now this is the first one. This is where I've decided to start. It's page 18, chapter. It's actually the prologue. I didn't know there was a prologue chapter. It's called The Cat with No More Lives. And it's the last paragraph of that chapter. And this is how it goes. I've now reached a point in my life where I know what I did and what I achieved. Now it's time to just tell the story. Exactly how it was, with everything that happened next. If people think less of me because of it, that's fine. But here it is. Everything. And that's the last paragraph of the prologue, and then it goes into chapter 1, which is called Rock Bottom. So throughout these podcasts, you're gonna have me reading excerpts from the book. And the reason why I wanted to do this on my own at the start, for call it the teaser episode, why I wanted to do it on my own at the start is to sort of discuss how it's going to be throughout this podcast, because I'm not going to be doing it alone. I'm going to be doing it with my brother. His name's Dan Piper. It must be something in the Piper family, because he also struggles with his mental health, that I only found out when I turned the microphones on in one of our first episodes that we recorded about 1 year ago. It seems every January I get that kind of feeling of, I want to do something new. I really want to do something new. It happens to me every January. I sort of know it's gonna happen, but I don't know what the thought is gonna be. And last January 2023, I decided now is the right time to bring a podcast out. So I asked my brother if he wanted to be a part of it. And he said, yeah. We turned the microphones on, and me and my brother are really close. There's 18 months between us. We've had a great relationship over the years. He's such a supportive, lovely human being, my brother. And we're really close. And we turned the microphones on, and it was then that I found out how deeply, and at times it turned out severely, he struggled with his own mental health and didn't really tell anyone that was close to him. Going to the doctors, having panic attacks in his bed at night time. He's got a lovely little family. He's got a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful children, 2 little girls. And sort of the focus had always been on me, I suppose, over the years, with what happened in football and then finishing football, and then the sort of disaster that came next with the drugs, the drink, the suicide attempts. sort of everything that came after. I suppose the focus of the whole family and our friendship groups was on me. And, you know, maybe he got neglected a little bit. Well, it's clear to see he did. And he was always trying to support me. And in turn, I didn't even know that he struggled himself. So there's an episode coming in the next couple of weeks of me and my brother when we had this sit down, and the sort of startledness that you can sort of feel in the episode, because I didn't know how much he struggled. So it's going to be my brother, and then a guy that has always been close to me since I was younger. At Leicester City, I met him first. His name's James Miller. He now runs my Kirby campus of the FSD Academy. That a lot of you follow me on social media, or you've read the book, you'll know how important the FSD Academy is for me, and what huge passion and drive and purpose it gives me in my life. And James has been one of my best friends since I was a kid. Lovely guy as well. Also has had his own struggles. And me and him also do an episode together to sort of introduce them and their personalities and what has come before in their lives to you guys that are listening. And they're going to be sort of early on in the episodes of Out of the Darkness podcast. And, you know, what's really important to me, and this is why I wanted to do the first episode on my own at start, is because for some reason, I'm like it on the radio where I work for BBC Radio Leicester. When there's not an audience here or anyone else, I feel like I can just really open up and, you know, talk without limits. And that's what this podcast needs to be. That's what the book was. I knew I wasn't a big time name in football, so who was going to buy my book? The premise of the book is total honesty. As you can see from the excerpt at the start of this podcast, what I read out, you're going to hear everything. And you're probably going to hear a little more on this podcast than you even read in the book. I decided it needs to be laid back. It needs to be totally honest. Whatever guests we get on with the conversations of the episodes that I did with my brother, is totally honest. There'll be laughs. There'll be tears. There'll be everything in between, but there will be truth, and whole truth and nothing but the truth. We even went to the extent of saying, do we swear in the podcast? Do we not? But when you've got a guard against how you normally speak in real life, I don't think there's that authenticity there. So there will be swearing, and none of it will be beeped out. I'm just letting everyone know at the start. And you're going to get to see the real me and the real person who's on the other end of the microphone, whoever I'm talking to. My brother Dan, my friend James. It's going to be all three of us at times. Sometimes it will be me on my own. And if I can't make an episode, sometimes it will be those guys steering the ship and running the podcast. I've got some great guests lined up. But just sort of this episode just needed to give you the structure of how I see it going. It may be an absolute disaster. It may be one of them. I hope it's not, because I think there's some, you know, real good to come from this podcast, real support. And the reason why, one of the main reasons why I really have a passion and a drive to get this podcast out there is because the amount of DMs I get are normally from guys a similar age to me, you know, sort of middle-aged, that are in a bit of a struggle. They don't know where to turn, they don't know who to talk to, and because they've either read my book or The Hero I talk sometimes on the BBC, it's quite open, and, you know, I have those struggles with mental health. They decided to DM me, and I think at one point throughout 2023 I decided to count those DMs, how many I received in 2023, and there was over 300. And it prompted me at that time to start putting in place a foundation. So there's also a foundation that will come out alongside this podcast called the Reboot Foundation, because I feel that's what I did in my life. I had to reboot. You know, I was Matt Piper, the footballer, and then I lost all my identity after football was over, and I needed to find myself and who I truly was. So I had to reboot the system, and you know, I think that started in rehab. Sort of, you know, when the struggle started to happen, and I rebooted my life and rebuilt it in a different way to that of, you know, Matt, who was the footballer. And that really helped me. It really gave me a basis to work from and a stronger structure. I learned a lot of tools, so many tools over the years to help me progress through life without getting too low and without going to those darkest places that I went to after the football career, you know, that culminated in me, you know, trying to take my own life, which, you know, I'm so far away from now. But I think the important thing to say is you are never, ever cured of mental health, ever. You know, there's some days that I still get up, really struggle, and I have to call on all them tools that I've built up over the years to try and get me through that day. You know, it's never been as low since as that suicide attempt, but to make sure it doesn't go that low, I have to call on these tools on a constant basis. And the podcast is not going to be doom and gloom. I promise you, it is not going to be doom and gloom. Every episode you turn in, you come away feeling negative. Hopefully, you're going to feel positive after you've listened to each episode. Hopefully you're going to feel enlightened with what some of the people have said and the advice that they've given. And it's going to be about a lot of lived experiences that I've been through, that some of the guests have been through, Dan and James have been through, and you'll be able to take that information and use it in your own life to start to gain your own tools to get yourself through a struggle or out of a depth that you've got to, and you feel that life is a little bit stagnated at the minute, or you're feeling really low. Hopefully you'll tune into this podcast and it'll help you move away from that and start to get into a place where I am now, which is a lot more at peace, a lot more happier, a lot more, you know, positive, and looking forward to the rest of my life, rather than looking back and, you know, waking up crying, waking up drunk, using and abusing drugs to try and, you know, get me through days. You know, them days are far behind me, but the low days still come. I don't know if you could see that. I put this on there at the start of the podcast because this is who I am. And one of the only vices that remains from my low periods in life is drinking. I still drink. I stopped for 2 years. But I do drink. I still drink, sometimes a little too much. And you might be able to see that in some of my Twitter posts. You know, some of them are different when I'm clean and sober. I think I go a little bit further, maybe piss a few people off with some of the things that I put, generally around football. So drinking is still a vice of mine. I don't take any drugs anymore. I don't smoke cigarettes. I don't smoke weed. I don't take any of the harder drugs. I try and live clean from drugs. I feel it puts me in a much better headspace without having drugs in the system. But I do still drink alcohol, and I still am, after all these years, which is a vice that I want to kick, but I just can't get rid of it. I'm still addicted to nicotine. That little dodgy little drug called nicotine, I am still addicted to. And if you're listening to this on the podcast and you're not viewing the video on YouTube, I'm holding my little smoking device. I call it my little smoking device. And I still do smoke this on a constant, and I am going to throughout the episodes of the podcast. I had a midlife crisis recently and got a load of tattoos on my hand, of which some of them I like because they mean things to me, and some of them I don't like. So I'm going to have to sort that out in the future. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about in this first episode, without anyone in the room, so I wasn't feeling awkward, or I tried to say it in a way that scared my other two presenters that will be with me into the future, is yes, I still struggle on a daily basis, but I have the tools to get through it. I've already spoke about that. But through lockdown, I felt like a little bit of a fraud, because a lot of these men and women were sending me DMs asking for advice, because, I think the general conception is people think I've come out of a dark place and I never go back there, or my addictive personality, I never suffer with that anymore. And I do still suffer a lot. And sometimes it still gets the better of me. And in lockdown, and this is important to say, and this is part of being open and honest in this first episode, I became addicted to opioids. And it was mad, really, how it happened, because I got COVID. The doctor thinks it was COVID. I had all the signs of COVID, and this was before the first lockdown. So I rang the Leicester City doctor and I said, "Doc, I think I've got this thing called COVID." And he said, "Yeah, it looks like in the future we may go into lockdown, but there's no way of really testing for it yet. The testing kits weren't out." So my kidneys were killing. And if you look back on my Twitter, X, on social media, you'll see a post that I put. I think it might have even been a video of me, and I was really struggling, and it was a feeling that I'd never had before. It didn't feel like man flu or a cold. It felt different. I couldn't breathe properly off my chest. My kidneys, my liver seemed like I'd been 5 rounds with getting punched in the ribs and the side of the body by someone like Mike Tyson. It was awful. And I thought, I read up on this COVID, and I thought, I've got that COVID. So I rang the Leicester City doc, who I still talk to a lot, great guy, Ian Patchett his name is. And I said, "Doc, I think I've got this COVID." And he said, "Listen, we can't get out to you at the minute, but some of the lads have been taking something called Solpadeine, and it's really helping them. It's a dissolvable, you drop it in water, it fizzes up, it's a strong painkiller, and it should relieve you of your symptoms and help you through." So I was, "Brilliant, doc." So I went to the chemist. I got this thing, you can get it over the counter. It's called Solpadeine, and I've been on and off addicted to Solpadeine since that date. So we're talking, when are we talking? We're talking nearly 3.5 years since COVID first came out, and it just gives me that little kick in the morning, or that little out of body experience, which comes from the opioid that's in Solpadeine. And it even says on the pack, do not take more than 3 days because it's highly addictive. I take anywhere between sort of 8 to 15 a day, or I did at my worst points. And, as I say, I felt like a bit of a fraud, because addiction had got the better of me again in my life, of having been clear of any kind of drugs or anything for so long. And all of a sudden now I've got this over-the-counter drug that's easily accessible. I'm driving around to lots of different chemists, because you start going in the same chemist to say, "Didn't you come in the other week and get some of this? You're only supposed to use it for 3 days." So, and then I'd quit, and I'd really try my best to be off it for, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And then, for instance, I'd get a little pain in my foot, and it was my brain wanting to get that drug back inside it. And I would listen to it and think, well, I've got pain in my foot, and it is a painkiller, so it makes sense to go and get the Solpadeine. It doesn't mean I'm addicted. And when you look at the pattern now, it went like that for 3 years. And I'm happy to say the reason why I'm finally got this podcast started is because I'm clean of that drug now. Have been for the last 3 months. And I'm determined. I am determined this time to make it stick. I do it on the radio. I do it going on the way into work. I do it to, and there's a mindset where you think, oh, if I've not had the Solpadeine, I feel really nervous and anxious going into this big meeting I've got with FSD, or meeting new people, or just about to go on the radio and talk to thousands of people. Got to take my Solpadeine, and that sort of gives me the confidence then to go and do it, because clearly, I think if you've read the book, or even if you've not, I've struggled with confidence over the years. It's much improved as I've got older and I've become clean and sober, and I know who I am as a human being a little more. But yeah, so it's a message to all those people that think Pipes is, he's got his life back on track, and nothing can knock it. Even though I've got all these tools and I feel really well equipped now for life, and really understanding my own personality, and when I get the lows, I know how to come out of them, and that's all true. But someone like me, who's got so much lived experience with mental health, drugs, addiction, alcoholism, an attempt at suicide, even someone like me who's sort of left all that behind him, can still get caught out and dragged back in by this crazy mind that I've got. And I think it was important to have this first episode really open and honest. Me sort of telling everyone what the podcast is going to be about. It's going to have guests on it. It's going to have well-known people, not so well-known people, normal everyday folk who have got a story to tell. And anyone really who myself, James and Dan, my brother, think they can give some advice and some lived experiences on the episode, that anyone listening that is going through a little bit of a struggle will help. Hopefully it will be entertaining, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. And if it falls flat on its face and it doesn't get many views, it doesn't get many listens, I'm not going to be one of these guys that says, I don't care if we only get one listener. If it helps that person, of course I want it to help anyone that listens. But at the same time, when you start something up like this, you do have those dreams and aspirations of it reaching a real wider audience, and lots of people listen to it. And I'm sure it's going to be controversial at times. Some of the things that are said on here, not everyone's going to like. But just the same as my job on BBC Radio Leicester, I've got to be honest and be true to my opinions and what I think. And the other guys that are with me are going to be encouraged to do that as well, and so will the guests. So a little bit of controversy from now and again, hopefully some laughs, hopefully all out honesty and truth, and it should be good fun while we're doing it. And hopefully you listen in. There'll be some excerpts from this little bad boy like there was at the start of this show. And this was just an introduction of what you can expect, who I am as a person. Still in his early 40s, middle-aged. He's getting tattoos on his fingers, and people are saying, what the hell are you doing? And then that's probably my addictive personality as well. I got one, my wife's initial, and the day we got married. And then all of a sudden, I come back 3 days later and, my hands are filled with them. Some of them I regret, some of them I don't. Yes, I'm still addicted to a vape. I try and hide it in public as much as I can, because I run a football academy for young kids, and try and inspire and, give them power to find their pathway in life through sport. So I should be the healthiest geezer ever. I'm not. And yeah, that's what it's going to be. I hope you can enjoy. I hope you will join me for the journey, and revel in the ups and downs of a podcast called Out of the Darkness. Thanks, everyone. Good first episode. Not too many laughs in that, though. But hey, I'll see you next time.